I've got 4,900 volunteers. That's not 4,900 numbers. That's 4,900 people, all with different reasonings to want to be there, all with valid reasons for wanting an important currency, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
That's what's real, like to manage the people.
Yeah.
You know, everyone
Compared
has these
to just-
teams like, you know, you've got a big team of 60. Hello, I've got 4,900.
Yeah.
And they're all just as important as each other.
Mm-hmm.
So managing people can be hard, you know, and especially people you don't know.
That was Kylie Elliott, the volunteer lead at the Sydney Children's Hospital Foundation. Kylie's journey into volunteer management is not just a career path, it's a calling fueled by her passion for making a difference in the lives of others. At SCHF, Kylie plays a crucial role in overseeing a volunteer program that has become the lifeblood of the organisation. The foundation has cultivated a community of nearly 5,000 dedicated volunteers, each driven by a shared commitment to supporting sick children and their families. But what sets SCHF apart isn't just the number of volunteers, it's the way they're valued and recognised. Every volunteer's unique currency is honoured, whether it's fostering social connections, learning new skills, or simply giving back to the community. Keep listening to hear Kylie's story today. Kylie Elliott, welcome to the Engaged Volunteer podcast. It's such a treat to have someone like you on this podcast. Not only your story, but also the story of Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation and the amazing work that you guys do. So, yeah, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and our first in-person podcast, Kylie. First
awesome.
one ever. So we're up in Sydney together at the moment, and our offices are across the road from each other.
I could see your office from my window.
Wow.
Which is cool.
We could have done it virtually from either side. Yeah.
But we didn't. We're doing it in person.
We're here now. Yeah, that's good. So now, I guess for our listeners around the world, obviously we're here in Australia, but Kylie's got a big influence in volunteering here in Australia. Really a heart and soul operator is what I would call you, Kylie. You're currently on the Australian volunteering sector on the National Volunteering Strategy in the implementation group and also on the task force for New South Wales volunteering. You enjoy your extracurriculars, don't you?
I love it. I love being the voice for volunteers. I'm very passionate about volunteers. We'll get to talk about this later, that the volunteer's voice is so important that can sometimes get forgotten. So
yeah, I agree. It's we'll get into about how you manage your time, but you're doing so much. Although I find this a constant in a lot of the guests that we have. They're taking on a lot and doing lots of volunteering themselves and other things. So it's a special part of this podcast. Now, another goal you have of yours, which I'm almost certain you'll be there, is to be on stage at the International Volunteering Conference later this year in Korea.
Yes.
You're going to be there?
I'm going to be there. Not might, I'm going to be there.
I love it. What would be, if you were to talk about something, what's so special about it? Why do you want to be there?
Because I've learned so much in the last 3 years. Well, really the last 4.5 years at SCHF. All my big wins have been here because I've been in an organisation that really encourages innovation. And when you have someone like me who is such a big picture person and you're encouraged, nothing has actually cost us any money. Mm-hmm. It's all been from just listening and collaborating and big, massive things that we've done. Everyone can do. I want to get on a stage and I want to be the person that everyone sits there and goes, I'm going to do that because she's just shown me how. As a volunteer manager, when I've watched other volunteer managers talking about these big wins, sometimes I felt like, how can I get there? I don't want anyone to ever have to say, how did she do it? I want to be able to show the little new volunteer coordinator, they can do this in a year. They can be up doing what I'm doing.
Yeah, I love it. And your program at the moment, so it started small, 250 odd volunteers, right? Yeah. And this was 2019?
2019, yeah.
2019. And what does it look like now? I know you're doing 150 plus events a year. And talk to us about the program. Why do you guys have a program? What does it do? How many volunteers?
Okay, so the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation, we fundraise for the Sydney Children's Hospital Randwick, the Children's Hospital at Westmead, Bear Cottage, which is an amazing hospice for children in New South Wales, the only hospice for children in New South Wales. NETS, which is a newborn emergency transport, paediatric and transport system, and kids research. So we have to do it. We do all the fundraising. So before I came in 4.5 years ago, we have amazing staff. We have event managers and community managers. They all had their own little volunteers. 255 volunteers. They were mainly friends and family, as all do, all on Excel sheets. So they put me in as the volunteer coordinator. Kylie, can you get these Excel sheets and put them onto our CRM? And from that, we just realised how many people out there really wanted to be a part of it and didn't really have an entry into it. So we built the program. Through COVID, we had, well, like everyone, we had no offices, we had no events, so we had no volunteering. But our volunteering went from 255 and we went to over 1,000 during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
So we actually built our volunteer program. And the way we did it was, okay, so we've got no events, we've got no volunteering, but let's check in every week. So we had a family trivia night where we encouraged families to come in. So volunteers brought their kids.
But families of volunteers, not families from children.
No, families of volunteers.
Right?
Yeah, but also our staff. So even our general manager, her children came every week and her son wrote one of the questions, the sports questions, and he presented it, 9 years old. He presented it.
I love it.
So we also got in, Channel 7 to come in. One of the reporters talked to these kids about presenting. So we trained like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-old children during it. And then everyone was like, they really care. When we went into lockdown at 5 o'clock on a Saturday, I sent out an email saying, I'm about to go into lockdown in a 3-bedroom house with my 2 grown children and 2 toddlers. Wish me luck. Are you doing okay? And so we started communicating really on a personal level, and it just grew and grew and grew. And now this morning we hit 4,900 volunteers.
Amazing.
So,
and these volunteers, they're going out to events on your behalf, in effect, to raise money for you guys. How does that function work?
Well, there's different ways. It's not just about raising money. So it might be about raising awareness. So we might just have volunteers that are out talking to members of the public about the good work that happens in our hospitals. We have the most amazing hospital system in Sydney, as well as our transport with nets and kids research. So they might be doing awareness. They could be out at City to Surf. City to Surf last year, we had 500 volunteers shaking pom-poms and cheering people along. We have volunteers inside our offices who have skills that come in and will help and walk alongside our staff. We have volunteers that come in and just make thank you calls. They don't ask for anything. They just ring up and say, thank you, we appreciate you, to our donors. We think outside the box. We do some things that people at first go, whoa, but my organisation being so, we're trusting you, Kylie, which is a bit scary. Our gold gala dinner, we do quite a few galas a year, and our gold dinner, it broke an Australian record 2 years ago, and it was just over $9 million.
Wow.
No, we're there. Last year, it broke a world record, $19.2 million in one night.
A world record?
World record.
Oh, my goodness.
For children's health charities.
Yeah.
And the volunteers that worked at that gala were all teenagers, were all school students. At first, when I suggested that, it was like, oh, but we'll trust you. But we had school students that came from schools that donors that were in there were from. So they actually had some sort of connection. So doing things that might seem a bit weird, but just talking to the people that would be utilising volunteers, talking to volunteers, you can come up with some amazing things, and it doesn't have to cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, from the outside looking in, it just feels like you put a lot of thought or like an attitude of why not into this, right? When compared to just saying, okay, you need 40 volunteers, I'll get you 40 arms and legs.
Yeah.
It's about and I'm sure you would have seen other areas of the business, probably like the gala dinner, and said, but hang on, what about volunteers?
Yeah.
Have you had to change the organisation structure and thinking about volunteers, and how have you gone about that? Because I'm sure it's not always easy.
Look, I'm actually doing at the moment, I think it's going to be around May, that'll be released an e-learning tool for new volunteer managers about setting up a successful program on a shoestring budget. And it's going to have 8 animations, and there'll be like a Kylie with the pink hair cartoon.
Hey, cool.
I've already done up to 5, but it'll be explaining ways of, like, one of the modules is about setting up a program. And the way I went into SCHF, some people have been working in the foundation for 20 years. I'm coming in as a brand new role, and some of these people had been doing these events for years and years successfully. The best thing you can do is to go in and just interview everyone and ask them, how do you use volunteers? How would you like to use volunteers? If I had a magic wand and I could make that happen, what are your dreams, even if they're outside the box? And that took me a month. And like for me, to keep my mouth shut for a month was hard because it's really hard to go, I know, do this will work.
Yeah.
But instead I went back and looked at these things, and then I came back to them and said, hey, I read what you said.
Okay,
and
so
I thought about
that was like a form, so it wasn't necessarily sitting in a room and you got an answer.
No, sitting one-to-one.
Okay, and then they documented
And I was
these
writing
things.
notes.
Okay, and each sort of department somewhat, and then you went away, thought about it, and then came back to those sort of line managers or something, was it?
Yeah, and explained what I was going to do and gave them a bit of buy-in. Like, respecting the legacy is really important. And I think sometimes it's really easy to jump in and go, I've got the answer, and I can do that sometimes, and I have to try and stop myself. And I found that worked really well at SCHF when I started, because I had buy-in straight away. And because I had these, I might have had these great ideas, but some of those ideas changed by stopping and listening to why they did these things. That might have looked silly at first, might have looked like it was cumbersome, but I could see the reason why they did things, and it gave me even better ideas.
Yeah.
So collaboration is key.
Easier said than done sometimes, I'm sure. And you would have learnt along the journey. We have a lot of young people aspiring volunteer managers. I think there's a balance, isn't it, around being
Definitely.
like, I'll put it all on my back. I'll take us on the journey. And then there's only one person to point fingers at too, in that sense. It can be tricky.
It definitely can. And it's something that's taken me a while to really understand. It is about observing. That's the real big thing, is look at your audience. I know your audience is a really important thing. So I look at what the executives need. Like, what does my manager need to talk to her manager about? Like, I know it's hard as a volunteer manager, and I hear it a lot in some of these groups that we're doing and networking, that it can be hard sometimes getting upper management to understand. I'm in a very unique position, whereas my CEO of our organisation is an amazing woman who came to our thank you function last year and was telling the volunteers how she started her career as a volunteer coordinator. So here she is as our CEO, but she started as a volunteer coordinator. So I've already know that my upper, executives understand. But sometimes you can get into that negative Nancy thinking it's not fair, I've got to keep. But yes, know your audience and see what they need. And then I'll adapt what information I give them. If that's what they want, I'll give them that and add a few things in to try and get.
Yeah, I hear you.
I've been married, so I know, how to.
Don't we all? Okay, fair enough. I think it's a really valid point, though, right? About getting the executive buy-in and the volunteering strategy. How does this align with the business strategy and things? I'm sure there's been times in your past where you might have had them off, or you've tried to go on one tangent and the business is like, well, we're over here. And maybe it sounds like your organization, and I see it, that you guys are invested in your program. But I mean, the journey it's been on since you've been at the helm is transformational. And I think that's what's so special about this. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on the volunteering currency that you operate with, and a bit of a mantra of yours in the program, and then the volunteering leader program you have in the hospital's foundation as well. But before we get into that, I wanted to understand a bit about your journey personally, about how and why you got into this, and understand you had a personal connection to the foundations as well. Is that right? And that sort of drove you to join? Yeah,
volunteering when I was about 16. I don't know how it happened. Just one day I saw something, would have been the local paper. There's no Google back then. But saw something about volunteering with children with disabilities. So I started at 16 volunteering. No one in my family volunteered. So it wasn't like it was a legacy thing. I was doing that on weekends. And then I started, when I got older, when I was 19, I was working. I started volunteering at Ronald McDonald House and did camp quality. And then I had babies. Then I had babies, and my marriage split up, and I started a university degree. But I started volunteering again in the schools, and I wanted my children, even if I wasn't working, but I was studying, I also wanted to volunteer to show my children the importance of working, that volunteering, they can, to be giving back. And when I was in my last year of a uni degree, so I was a single mum with 3 kids, and one of my daughters, my middle daughter, she had uncontrolled epilepsy for years and was spending a lot of time at Westmead Children's Hospital. And it sounds like one of these movie things, but one day I can remember specifically sitting downstairs outside the cafe with my computer doing my uni work. My other 2 children were up on the Central Coast being minded by people. We'd been there for 2.5 weeks. We just went down one day and didn't leave. And I was watching some volunteers walking past, and I thought, God, I'd love to work in here. And I was studying to be a teacher. And then when I went back to the Central Coast, I was working in a food bank part-time as a volunteering, should I say, part-time, and it became 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week. And then the manager left and they said, do you want the job? And I ended up leaving uni in my last year of a uni degree. It had taken me 6 years to get to my final year. But I really saw how it was a charity food store, and I saw the impact that volunteers were having on these families that were, like we don't know in Australia, there was so many people that are the hidden homeless. And I really felt like I was giving back and I could see the difference I was making in the volunteers. So I worked there for about 2 years and really enjoyed it. But then their mission didn't align with my values. And I was like, I can't stay. So I actually volunteered, which is not a good thing for volunteer managers to hear, but I volunteered nearly full-time in an organisation for a year as their volunteer coordinator in disabilities. And they found me paid work. And I stayed there for a couple of years till I went to a big disability organisation. Then I went back to the Central Coast to a mental health community centre and had volunteers with mental health supporting people with mental health.
Wow.
And one day I was there and this ad came up for the Sydney Children's Hospitals Foundation and for the volunteer coordinator, and it was a new role. And I was like, there's no way. I'm just a single mum on the Central Coast. I've been volunteering for about 6 years. I actually had Bell's palsy because the job I was in was right stressful. So half of my face had drooped, and I remember ringing up the manager and saying, I don't know if I can come for the interview because I've got Bell's palsy. And she said, what's that? And I said, I look like I've had a stroke.
Yeah.
And she said, can we catch it? And I said, no, but I might be drooling in the interview. And she said, that doesn't matter as long as we can't catch it. Come on in.
Yeah.
And I was just so shocked when she said, you've got the job. She said there was a lot of applicants, but it was the passion. She said, we can't teach anyone passion, we can teach the others.
Oh, amazing.
And they just let me, they backed me and they supported me. And, here I am in the job that I dreamed about, but a bit better than the job that I dreamed about. I was dreaming about just part. And so I'm not just supporting the good work that Westmead Children's Hospital, the Children's Hospital at Westmead do, but also, over at Randwick and Bear Cottage and Nets and Kids Research. And I'm seeing the impact. I'm walking through the hospital and seeing the impact of the amazing work that we do and hearing stories from volunteers. And, I'm actually in my dream job. It's just I manifested it and it came true.
Just like you'll be in Korea later this year.
Yes, I will be in Korea.
Amazing. Thanks for that detail. I think the heart and soul thing I touched on at the very beginning, like you're just following what feels right to you. And, I mean, you said you volunteered for a whole year.
Yeah.
With 3 kids?
Yeah.
How did you manage to do this?
It was hard because I've always volunteered. Like even when I was at university, I was volunteering as a scripture teacher 3 days a week, as doing full-time uni, as well as doing the school stuff. I had such a passion for when I love doing something, you just,
Yeah.
But now I understand, though, as a volunteer manager, I would never allow someone to do full-time volunteering. Like that's not fair. Like, you don't want to burn people out. I might sometimes think I am a superhero, but now I realise, as a manager, I'd never want to put anyone into that position.
Yeah.
So it's not something that I think is a good thing, volunteering full-time, but it got me to where I am now. Mm-hmm. So, volunteering can be a great pathway into employment. And volunteer management, I really think we need to get – no one grows up. Every volunteer manager I've spoken to, I've asked them, when you were little, did you say, when I grow up, I want to be a volunteer manager?
Yeah.
None of us want to. Because
they didn't go to uni for it. There's no course for it.
And there's nothing. Because I want people to see that it's a great career to have. It's an amazing career. It's a hard career, but such a rewarding career.
What's so hard about it for people that are maybe thinking about going into the career? What are the tough parts?
Well, because, as I said, I've got 4,900 volunteers. That's not 4,900 numbers. That's 4,900 people, all with different reasonings to want to be there, all with valid reasons for wanting an important currency, which we can talk about.
Yeah.
That's what's real, like to manage the people.
Yeah.
Everyone has these teams like, you've got a big team of 60. Hello, I've got 4,900.
Yeah.
And they're all just as important as each other.
Mm-hmm.
So managing people can be hard, and especially people you don't know. Because I'll often have, we're going to have an event and people will assume I know all these people. My communication with our volunteers is very authentic and it does seem like I know you,
And they
I'm
probably
happy.
feel like you.
They do. I'll get,
But then when you bump into them in the street, there's 4,900 of them.
I know, and we put a picture out at Christmas, so there will be people that will bump in, and I'll get someone come up to me at an event, and my memory is so bad sometimes. So, and I'm honest. That's the one thing that I am with the volunteers, and I think you can be authentic with your volunteers, and I've got that as one of the modules is really in the communication. You can talk to them to 4,800 people like you're talking to you now, like we're talking now, if you're being authentic and owning stuff. Like I think it was about 18 months ago, I sent it out an email to about 2,500 people. And I did. We've all done it, the cut and paste, whereas I should have checked and I left one line in and the line said, please respond to this email within the next hour. Because it was to a couple of people in my team. Well, I sent that out to 2,500 people about a job that was on a Saturday, like some volunteer role on a Saturday collecting donations. My emails was going, bidding, 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 bidding. And I was like, I'm so sorry, I've got a wedding. I'm so sorry, I've got to work. Like real doctor's notes. And I was like, oh my goodness. So then I was what am I going to do? So I wrote back to them and said, I've just cut and pasted. I've just done the lazy thing and I've cut and pasted. I'm so amazed at how awesome you all are. So sorry if I've caused any,
But hey, confusion. But it's so authentic of you as well. I don't think many people would
own the stuff.
Own it.
I thought that would stop the emails. That was a Friday afternoon.
My emails, certificates.
I got about 600 emails over the weekend. They were all, ha, 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 I've done that before. Ha, 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 you're hilarious. Ha, ha. It was all funny. Not one person said, you're annoying me, or not one person said, how dare you write that, or that was so rude.
Yeah, just being real.
Be real. You can have these beautiful, like we've got the most amazing marketing team that send out these beautiful, like the best marketing people we've got.
Mm-hmm.
But I write the emails and the emails they're not to the standard that our marketing people will, because it's very authentic. It is like I'm talking to those volunteers and it pays off. It's working.
Yeah.
Where others in COVID was, we're talking about the 25% decline.
Yeah.
We're like 388% increase because we got real with our volunteers.
Yeah, amazing. I think it's such a lesson for everyone out there.
Yeah.
So let's talk about volunteer currency. Okay. I'll let you take over here.
The spiel, the volunteer currency is, we talk about at SCHF, every volunteer is paid and everyone looks at me like, how do you do that? Well, it's their currency. We have to find out what their currency is. With our volunteer leaders who are our staff or our volunteers that may be leading an event, that's a big thing. Is your job is to find out what the currency is of the volunteers you're working for. Is that volunteer coming to give back because they had an experience in one of our hospitals or a family member? Or is it because they want to learn a new skill? Is it a person from a new Australian that wants to learn language or wants to make some friends? That sort of stuff. So, and then make sure that we are paying above award. Like I say, we pay above award. So make sure that if they are out to make friends, help them.
Mm-hmm.
When we have an event, I might be asked for, 10 volunteers. I'll actually get 20. We need one volunteer here, I'll always make sure there's 2. So they've got someone to talk to. So, the work is really important, but also the currency, make sure the volunteers are paid.
How do you possibly do that at scale with 4,900 people?
Well, I've never had an event with 4,900
people.
True,
good point. That's a database, but on the weekend.
Yeah, but when we do have an event like City to Surf, so this year we're aiming to have about 750 volunteers from Bondi Beach to, I think, Vaucluse. There'll be about 750 volunteers.
Amazing.
It's not just going to be me with my walking stick running up and down with a megaphone.
Yeah, going, you need this.
That's why it's important to have this new leadership program that we've done. So
which is the second element here, right? Yeah. So you can't have one without the other.
No, you need to have, so we have smaller groups to make sure it's not about, even staff have all completed, anyone that works with our volunteers completes this leadership program. It's not just about handing them a T-shirt when they sign in using a QR code and say, here's a bucket, off you go. It's about introducing them to, first, why are you here? Telling them about us as an organisation, about who we're supporting, and importantly, what's the impact of what they're going to do today? Because, we all know that the majority of volunteers that we have now are the Gen Zs. The Gen Zs are a big part of our...
So that's a large proportion of
large portion of volunteers is like these Gen Zs, and Gen Zs know they're going to change the world, right? They want to know why, what impact they're going to have by coming out and rattling a tin, We'll never ask anyone to rattle a tin either. We'll say to them, we want to encourage them to join the movement of many. Don't step in front of people and try and get a donation like that. Stand there. If you're nervous, chat amongst. We want people to look at you and say, what is SCHF about? We want volunteers to have a great experience, and the volunteer team leaders are also got to find out why they want to be there.
How do I become a volunteer team leader, and how many of do you have? Is it just dependent on the event that you have on the weekend that you allocate leaders, or is there like a recruitment process where I need to apply to become a leader? How does it functionally work?
Okay, so we only just released this in December last year, and we had our staff. The reason why we did do it so quickly was because we had about 17 events over 10 days with 1,000 volunteers across the city of Sydney because it was Christmas. So we realised the need to have good volunteer management. So staff that has signed up to volunteer, because all organisations, you'll hear about the staff will be getting in and helping out with volunteer management, realise that staff need to be trained too.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they work in your organisation, they don't understand volunteer management. And sometimes we can be, as volunteer managers, think that it's assumed knowledge. But so they'll hand in the shirt and they will sign the person in, but asking about the currency, teaching them about how to go up and what to say. How are you going today? Are you enjoying it? Why do you want to volunteer? Having conversations and giving them conversation starters. So we had 35 staff signed up and then we did a big Zoom, and then we had an e-learning tool that I had created that they all completed. We had some targeted volunteers that we had known for at least a year that we chose, and I think there was about 15 of them that have been trained up. And starting next week, we've got 4 training nights over the next 2 weeks, and there's 80 spots for people to go into the training. So what we're foreseeing coming out of the training program is there's going to be some younger volunteers. I spoke to a teacher at one of the colleges about his students, that some of them wanted to come, but would they be too young? And I said, no, we'll have different sort of leaders. So we'll have some leaders that will come along, but they'll probably shadow some, as long as they're confident enough to lead a team of adults, or be trained up. So we're not going to just go for we need super trainers, supervisors. We're also going to train some trainers on their way up as well. So
nice.
Yeah, it's just the starting, but I foresee it's going to make our lives a lot easier in the coming months.
And again, functionally, will it be for each event you must have one team leader allocated? Is that kind of how you roll it out?
It'll be on an event-to-event basis. There will always be someone leading volunteers. So we will always there's always going to be someone. There'll never be volunteers just left out on their own.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never do that. So there'll be volunteer leaders, or there could be event leaders as well.
Yeah.
So,
is there like a ratio you reckon you'd be aiming for, or it's really quite loose at the moment?
No, because they're not. That's the thing. The ratios, I don't like that because they're humans.
Yeah.
These events have all got different sorts of goals and impacts, and so you can't just look at events, especially like City to Surf. I can say 750, but at a water station, you're probably going to need a couple of more team leaders than you would at the cheer line when you've got 50 volunteers with pom-poms.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So that's where it is, the juggling, and sometimes it can look like an easy process from the outside, but it's not. That's the volunteer management stuff that can get a bit icky, but works when you do it well.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, wow. Volunteer currency, I like it. I think people can really take something from that. And the leader program too, I think it shows to especially if you have a younger demographic, that you're investing back into them too.
Yeah.
Is there something, and I appreciate this is early days in the program, but is there something, if I was a 19-year-old university student and I was to become a leader, is there something I'm getting back tangible, perhaps in exchange, like a certificate or something that will help me in my next job? Is there anything like that you're discussing?
Definitely. With everything, with every volunteer role, even if someone comes in and volunteers with SCHF for an hour, we don't usually have an event for an hour, but we might have something for, say, 3 hours. And that's all they do over the year. Kylie and I will nominate them for Volunteer of the Year, New South Wales Volunteer of the Year. They'll get invited to an award ceremony and get a certificate handed to them by their Member of Parliament. Last year we nominated, I think it was about 1,200. We're going to be nominating over to maybe 3,000 more volunteers this year. Every single person is going to get nominated. They're going to have this great certificate that says that they were nominated for Volunteer of the Year. They also get a certificate after every single event that they do with us. We'll send them out a certificate. We also do a volunteer thank you function in National Volunteer Week, where we encourage our staff to come along. A lot of our executives come along as well, and it's a real networking. I'll get up there and show photos and some big impacts that we did. We'll make it very short. The CEO will have a few words to say, and then it's really networking. This time we're talking about this year is thinking about people who've utilised volunteers externally, so event people, external events, or in the hospital where they've asked for volunteers, encouraging them to come along and network with our volunteers. So I'll also write letters of reference for university, like when university starts back, it's like, oh, here comes the emails.
Here it comes.
But you know what? They gave up their time.
Yeah.
But you think about it now, post-COVID, we are so time aware since COVID. If you, as yourself, stop for a second and think, if I was to take 7 hours out of my Saturday, that's pretty big now. You know, volunteering on a weekend or on your time out is pretty big. So, Kylie, pull your finger out and do this email for 5 minutes. You know what I mean? It'll make a huge impact for someone who could have been volunteering with you for, months.
Yeah.
But even if they volunteered for only one event, I'll still do it.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
And then one thing I'm very interested in is around that impact for the volunteers. And so I think there's quite a generic view of impact.
Yes.
For example, like ours, but then there's the true impact. And for you guys, I mean, for myself personally, I'm a dad of 2 young kids. My daughter went into hospital when she was only 1.5, 2, with a similar epilepsy style situation. And I mean, the angels that were floating around that hospital helping these young, beautiful little kids, the cause in which, and seeing that, I left that going, oh my God, like whatever we can do to support these types of people that help children in need like that. Like unfortunate, but unfortunate to see that. Not everyone gets to see that, right? But how do you try and connect between, I'm at a drink station volunteering for 6 hours?
That's a really good question.
And the cause and how that helps those babies that are in need or children that need some help. How do you try and draw the line?
That's where we got the team leader. That's one of the reasons the team leader was born, because I'm in a really, I'm sort of sitting in this cavern between two things, right? The volunteering sector at the moment, they're saying we need to talk about impact. We need to get away from the hours, get away from how much money you saved your organisation and all that sort of stuff. But actually, I work in fundraising. So I really need to talk about the hours and how much money it saved our organisation. But the impact, so then it was like I was pulling impact from our organisation, but like how if someone's standing out there with a donation tin, how is that affecting a child who is sick in hospital, like your child in hospital? But how do I get that impact to that person? So that's why this team leader program, that's what we're talking about. We're really educating our volunteer leaders with things like our marketing team have been amazing. I've got all these one-pagers for them. There's things like setting up a marquee and how to hand out a T-shirt and all that sort of stuff. But I've got these one-pagers on the impact that the foundation does in fundraising for each of our hospitals or Nets and Kids Research and Bear Cottage, or what, $25, what that looks like in the hospital. These are conversation starters that they're encouraging to talk to volunteers about, because that's really important. That's what the volunteers, because everyone thinks, why do we have to have fundraising in hospitals? Doesn't our government pay for everything? It's about educating about that. I always thought that. I was naive and thought all this great stuff when I was in there for a month was all because of the amazing government we have. We have these great hospitals, but what makes them world class is because of the foundation. Like we raised, over $80 million last year to support the hospitals.
$80 million last year you raised.
Well, how much was it exactly? Just under $90 million we raised last year to keep the hospitals at the world class how they are now, like the patient experiences and things like that, art programs and, music therapists and all these extra things. Yep. We help build these new, exciting new centre out at Westmead and Randwick. We're paying for a lot of these new buildings there. So the foundation is so important, but it's getting the volunteers to understand that, because the volunteers are the ones standing in front of our donors at these events. And when the volunteers see why their work is so important, why they're part. So we say to the volunteers, we want them to join us in the movement of many. I will never send an email out saying, thank you. We couldn't do what we can do without you, because that's not true. I could get another volunteer in if they can't fill that role. Instead, thank you for joining the movement of many. We are the movement of many. Together, we can do great things for sick kids.
So the movement of many is your term for you, or is it
It's our organisation's term?
Organisation.
Because volunteers are part of our organisation. It's not an extra part. It's like they're joining the movement of many. So are our donors. So are our staff. We're all together. We're doing great things together for sick kids.
Yeah.
And I think that's really, really important, that impact and that joining together as a team.
Yeah.
But how do you get that impact? You can send it out in an email, but people don't read the emails. While they're volunteering, they need to hear that through conversation. Sure. And that's why the team leaders are so important.
I mean, in a dream world, right, you're bringing volunteers perhaps into a hospital and seeing some of the children, right? Because recently I was with the organisation Very Special Kids down in Melbourne who are, I mean, again, beautiful organisation doing incredible work. Yes. And I got to tour around the facility and see some of these kids with volunteers reading books, playing with soft toys, trying to engage. And you leave that going, again, how do I help these guys? Mm. Like, how can you make it more real? For example, other people have raised to us, well, perhaps when parents are leaving a hospital, could they leave a note for a volunteer, as an example? Have you thought about those sort of things to, again, tighten that connection between patient and volunteers?
Well,
or is there a line where you don't want to cross?
We don't want to. We also don't want to be using our sick kids for marketing and stuff.
Yeah.
And you can see that we are actually doing that because if you look at our new brand, our brand is very noticeable now. And we have these cartoons in these modules. There's Milo and Minka. So they're our cartoons that SCHF uses to represent children. You'll see sometimes Milo or Minka will have no hair like some of our children in oncology, or will have a feeding tube, or will use a wheelchair or a walking stick. So we don't want to use children that way. And the funny thing is, these 4,800 volunteers probably don't get to see any of our patients. We don't work in the hospital. That's another misconception, that they think our volunteers all work in the hospital. Our volunteers support fundraising efforts for our hospitals.
Yes.
So that's another reason why I can't just take them into a ward, and nor would I, because our little sick people need to get better.
100%.
And our clinicians need to do their job. So we make sure that's why in our team leader program that we are having these conversations and they get to know this, and we share impact with our volunteers. Mm-hmm. I don't exclude them from any EDM in our organisation. Mm-hmm. So it's up to them to choose, because I'm not arrogant enough to know what every person, what they like or what they want to learn about. They want to join the movement of many. I'm not just saying you can only just join volunteering. I'm opening up the whole of the foundation to them. So I just think, it's just really, really important for us as volunteer leaders to be explaining that impact. We don't need to have our little kids do that.
I think that's such great insight. I think, isn't it? Like, there would be enough reason to think you could or should, right?
And I could have the capacity. We could have tutelers, but we don't want to.
Yeah, exactly. But I think that's very valuable insight. And you've clearly thought about how you got to that answer there. So interesting. All right, we're getting close to time. One of the questions, this is a tricky one, but we're wanting to, and again, we spoke about this, wouldn't it be great if we have a conference of all these engaged volunteer hosts that get together one day? Have you got a question you would like to ask another volunteer leader on one of the upcoming podcasts?
Yeah, this is something that I really love doing. I sort of like a nerd out on is I like seeing something that looks like it could be a problem and turning it into an opportunity. Like when you see something that's like, oh, this is going to be bad, and then you just stop, step back, and then turn it into something awesome. What's your best one of those moments?
Awesome. Yeah, okay. I like it. And you would have had thousands of these moments, I'm sure, but have you got a moment that stands out to you in volunteering across your career? Is there a moment, a team that you didn't think were going to make it and they were amazing, or a volunteer that just rode their bike for 4 hours to get to a shift? Is there anything that jumps out to you as like a bit of a highlight across your time?
There's two. Is the gala volunteers. So when I started, the team that was running the galas were like these, they're now my friends, but back then they looked like these unattainable, amazing, gorgeous human beings that organised galas. And I'd never been to a gala. I'm a girl from the Central Coast. And they paid models to work at these galas. And here I was going in saying volunteers, and I got them to students. And the first time we had students at our Gold, so we had 15, 16, 17-year-old girls at the Gold. I asked the staff to take them because they were young to each table and introduce them. And staff came back to me, and it was a moment where because up until that moment, I looked so confident to everyone, like this is what but I was inside so terrified that it wasn't going to work, doing the duck thing.
Yeah.
And at that moment I felt, I can breathe, because the staff came back to me and said, Kylie, are you just like, you're making a joke? And I'm like, what? And they said, I introduced that girl and, a famous swimmer stood up and gave her a hug and said, where's mum and dad? And she said, 2 tables down. And then someone said, I took this girl over to the table and her parents got up. You made me introduce her to her own family. And it was all this. And I was like, this is what I've been trying to say to you. These kids are from this room. This is their community. So I felt so, that was that moment. And the next one is one that's just recent. When we started last year with this team leader program, it was the first time that we worked with the City of Sydney, and we're the charity of the City of Sydney. And, the staff had come to me and said, we're going to have all the Christmas concerts around Sydney, and we're going to have turning under the Christmas tree, we're going to have Giving Day and all these volunteers. And so the first day that we had, this guy, Tracy, turned up. And Tracy was just amazing from the moment I met him. You always got that one volunteer that just gets it, and that everyone's going to go, oh, that guy Tracy, and that's what I get. Tracy has been at every single event since the 29th of November. Now, we did probably...
29th of November, what year?
Last year.
Oh, last year.
But it doesn't sound much. But we had 3 concerts every weekend for 3 weekends. And we had the turning on the Christmas tree. We had 2 days of the opening of Christmas. We had every single event he went to. Then we had stuff after Christmas. He's been to every event. And he's one of my team leaders.
Yeah.
And the first day I met him, I said to him, would you think about being a team leader? And he goes, I don't think it's for me. I don't think. He's now the most amazing person, and he's so infectious. And I watch him where staff are coming up to me and saying, is that what we're supposed to be doing? Because he's talking, they can hear him talking about the good work of the foundation just as he's having coffee with the volunteers. And I just said, he's like the beacon. He's like, this is why. If anyone asks me about the team leader program, I'll just go spend 5 minutes with Tracy. So, they're the 2 things that stand out and make me really proud.
I love it. Well, I think that last point, to sum it up as best I can, would be to summarize the impact there. We've spoken about, there's almost 2 chains of thought in volunteering being like, I'll put it all on my back and no matter what, I'm going to make it happen. And there's a balance to that. Like the gala dinner wouldn't have happened unless you said, I got this sorted, guys. We're going to try this way, even though you're a bit nervous. So you got to have a balance of that to be able to, the fire starter, to make something happen and be courageous to take a risk, because that's a risk, right? If it screws up, that's on you. And then when they go, well, hey, we didn't raise enough money. Who decided to bring volunteers? Oh, it was you. Like, that's risky. Yeah. There's that, but then there's the getting out of the way and letting the program create its own identity. And without the volunteer leaders and the currency, without that, you would just, you get 1,000 emails already, but you would just be even more. And the organization can suffocate that. If you had a week off, they would be going, oh my God, what's going to happen? Yeah. And again, they probably would a little bit because you're so important, but it's the point of saying that you're building a program and a legacy around you that will survive long after, if you were to go and go somewhere. And I think that's, from a lot of the best podcasts we've had to the best sort of volunteer managers I've found have been able to realize it doesn't all rely on them. And I think building that culture and of those leaders and people around that can help support. And you've done such a good job with the business as well, the staff, engaging them into the program, bringing them to the gala dinners, these sorts of things, because without their buy-in, then you're just standing on the sidelines yelling at them saying, you don't get it. And that's challenging.
And I think the big thing is with staff is that, look, it was only last year that I trained the staff. So where I've been before and where a lot of people are still probably now is that when you have staff working with volunteers, we just sort of let the staff work with the volunteers. But we really need to be brave. It was scary going to staff saying, you know what, I know you're a general manager, but if you're going to work with volunteers, you need to do a few things. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. I was worried. I was actually, again, doing the duck thing, walking around misconfident about this team leader program, but I was worried that staff weren't going to do it.
How did they take it?
Well, I put out the Zoom first to see how that would go, and everyone accepted. And I was like, okay. And then I was like, and now you must do this mandatory e-learning thing. So I went on the next day and they've all done the e-learning thing. And I was like, wow. And we do a survey after each event from the team leaders and from the volunteers. And reading back through the surveys, it was just like, I wasn't doing them a service by just allowing them. They were like, I didn't realize about the currency. I like this. This is so much easier now. I know I have these things to do, and you've set it out so much easier. So I was actually doing them a disservice by just going, okay, this stuff, I can't tell them what to do. And it's not telling them what to do, but educating them on the importance of good volunteer management. So,
I think, if you've been involved in all these strategy sessions across Volunteering Australia, New South Wales, I'm presuming, but I'm sure one of the biggest topics that gets raised in these groups would be around the lack of buy-in across an organisation.
Definitely. It's a big conversation.
And I think that what you've just raised with us today around the way to get buy-in isn't necessarily about screaming at them saying, why don't you understand what we're doing? You're bringing them into the journey. And the evidence is showing that by inviting them into the journey, they've been receptive to it. Definitely. And so for people listening, give it a shot. And what's the worst that can happen? Really?
Well, I haven't had any negative.
The olive branch.
It's just the scariest things that I've done have got me. I haven't had the negatives, like, even the COVID stuff where I was thinking, we're going to lose the volunteer. No, we didn't. It's very easy to sit there, and I've been in these teams with volunteer managers, and it starts going down that negative track of no one's listening, no one understands it. Well, you know what? That's true. It's been going forever. Let's stop that. Let's all agree, yes, it sucks. But let's try and pivot it and try and just have a couple of, all these things didn't happen last month. Like, you drip feeding it. But now I've got such buy-in. I've got the most amazing staff that work around me that want to do really great things. But I just assumed they knew these things. So, don't assume. It makes an ass out of you and me. Just have those brave conversations and, working together. One team, one dream is what I always say, isn't it?
I love it. Well, let's leave it at that then. One team, one dream. Kylie, thank you so much. It's been a treat. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Engage Volunteer podcast. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the world of volunteering. Until then, stay engaged and keep making a difference in your community.